Those were the desperate words of a pregnant 18-year-old girl dragged in a burlap sack and put up for sale in a dusty frontier town. The crowd laughed. The auctioneer sneered until a silent mountain man stepped forward, cutting her free with the last of his silver. But what began as a rescue turned into a storm. Within hours, she gave birth in lamplight. And by dawn, a deputy rode up with shackles, swearing she had stolen the railroad's gold. Was she an innocent mother, or a marked woman carrying a secret no one dared to speak? Thundering hooves, a crooked deputy, a drunken stepfather, and a newborn's cry. Justice in this town is for sale, and mercy costs more than money. Can one broken man protect a girl and her child against a town ready to see them hang? Or will the truth be buried before it's ever heard? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The summer heat pressed down on the mining town's auction yard like a heavy wool blanket. Dust swirled in eddies around stomping hooves and scuffing boots, while the acrid smell of cheap whiskey mixed with horse sweat and tobacco. The mountain man stood at the edge of the restless crowd, his weathered face expressionless beneath the brim of his worn hat. He hadn't meant to stop here, was just passing through on his way to nowhere in particular. But something had drawn him to pause when he heard the commotion. The auctioneer's platform creaked under the weight of a heavy-set man in a greasy vest, his voice carrying across the yard. "Next up, something special for you boys." He gestured with exaggerated flourish toward the side of the platform. A burly man with 3 days' worth of stubble and alcohol-reddened eyes dragged forward something that writhed inside a dirty burlap sack. The crowd pressed closer, their curiosity piqued by the mysterious movement. The mountain man's hand tightened involuntarily on his belt as he watched. Years of instinct telling him something wasn't right. "Got me a wild one here," the stubbled man announced, his words slurring slightly. "Been nothing but trouble, but might be worth something to the right buyer." He yanked hard on the sack, making whatever was inside cry out. The sound was unmistakably human, female, young. The mountain man's jaw clenched. He'd seen much in his years on the frontier, both good and bad, but this raised the hair on the back of his neck. Around him, other men shifted uncomfortably, though none stepped forward to intervene. With a cruel laugh, the drunk man upended the sack. A young woman tumbled out onto the rough wooden platform, her hands bound tight with rope. Her dark hair fell in tangles around her face and bruises marked her brown skin. She was clearly of mixed Apache and Mexican descent, and obviously with child, her swollen belly visible beneath her torn dress. "Please," she gasped, struggling to her knees. Tears streaked clean lines through the dust on her face. Her English was clear but accented, her voice cracking with desperation. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and harsh in the hot air. The auctioneer played to it, affecting an exaggerated accent. "Well, ain't that special? 2 for the price of 1. More laughter followed, though some men turned away, shame finally overcoming their curiosity. The mountain man felt something stir in his chest, something he'd thought long buried in a small grave alongside his wife and infant daughter. The memory of that loss still cut deep, but now it drove him forward instead of holding him back. His boots scraped in the dust as he stepped closer to the platform. 50 cents, someone called out mockingly. $1, another voice joined in, treating it all like some sick joke. The girl doubled over suddenly, her bound hands clutching at her belly. Even from where he stood, the mountain man could see this was no act. Her labor had truly begun. The stepfather gave her a rough shake. "Stop your playing around and stand up straight." $10. The mountain man's voice carried clearly across the yard, stopping the mockery cold. Heads turned to stare at him as he stepped forward, his hand already reaching for the small pouch of silver coins at his belt, the last of his savings from the spring fur trade. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. Well, now, looks like we got us a serious bidder. He looked around the crowd. Do I hear 11? Silence fell. The other men drew back slightly, not wanting to be associated with what was happening now that someone had brought legitimate business into it. The stepfather's bloodshot eyes narrowed as he looked the mountain man up and down. 15s, the mountain man said firmly, dropping the coins onto the platform with a solid clinking sound. It was everything he had, but he kept his face impassive. The auctioneer snatched up the silver quickly before anyone could object. Sold to the gentleman in the buckskins. He seemed eager to be done with the whole business now that real money had changed hands. The stepfather sneered as the mountain man climbed onto the platform. Waste of good silver, if you ask me. She ain't worth half that. He gave the girl a rough shove toward her new owner. The mountain man caught her gently before she could fall. Without a word, he drew his knife and cut through the ropes binding her wrists. She looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, another contraction making her gasp and clutch at his arm. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, but not before the whispers started. The mountain man could hear them clearly enough, disgust, judgment, and worse in their tones. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the trembling young woman before him. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. She nodded, then shook her head as another pain gripped her. The mountain man didn't hesitate. He simply scooped her up in his arms, one hand supporting her back, the other under her knees. She was light, too light for someone in her condition, speaking of missed meals and hard treatment. "Better take your property and your half-breed lover," someone called out from the dispersing crowd. Others muttered in agreement, but the mountain man paid them no mind. He'd lived too long in the wilderness to care what town folk thought of him. The girl turned her face against his shoulder, whether from shame or pain he couldn't tell. "Thank you," she whispered, her words barely audible. I thought no one would." "Save your strength," he told her, already striding away from the auction yard. They'd need to find somewhere safe and quick. The baby wouldn't wait much longer, and this town was no place for either of them now. Behind them, he could hear the stepfather's drunken voice rising in anger as he argued with the auctioneer over his share of the silver. The mountain man quickened his pace, knowing that trouble rarely ended clean in places like this. The girl in his arms tensed with another contraction, and he felt her fingers dig into his shoulder. They needed help, the kind that wouldn't be found among the sneering faces and hard hearts of the mining town proper. But he'd noticed a small church on the outskirts as he'd ridden in, the white paint peeling but the cross standing straight. Sometimes, he'd learned, you had to trust in something bigger than yourself. The crowd's murmurs faded behind them, replaced by the sound of his boots in the dust and the girl's quiet whimpers of pain. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the mountain man's steps never faltered. He'd buried his heart once in the hard prairie soil, sworn never to let anyone close enough to matter again. But standing by and watching cruelty unfold was a kind of death, too, one that killed the soul instead of the body. So he walked on, carrying his unexpected burden toward whatever lay ahead, while behind them the mining town buzzed with fresh gossip about the crazy mountain man who'd spent his last silver on a half-breed girl about to birth a baby right there in the auction yard. The story would grow with each telling, but the truth was simple enough. Sometimes a man had to choose between walking away and standing up, and once that choice was made, there was no going back. The girl's breathing grew more labored as another contraction took hold. The mountain man could feel the curious stares of townsfolk as he carried her down the dusty street, but he kept his eyes fixed ahead. He'd seen enough of humanity's darker nature for one day. Right now, his only concern was finding a safe haven for the young woman in his arms before her child decided to make its appearance. Heat waves shimmered off the packed earth of the street, and even the horses tied to the hitching posts seemed to droop in the punishing sun, but the mountain man's steps remained steady, each one taking them further from the auction yard and closer to whatever providence might await them at the church's weather-worn door. He'd spent too many years alone with his grief, letting it hollow him out like winter wind in a dead tree. Maybe it was time to remember there were other ways to honor the dead than by joining them in loneliness. The girl's fingers clutched at his buckskin shirt as another pain racked her body. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble." "Trouble finds its own way," he answered quietly. "You just rest now. We'll sort it all out after." The mountain man's boots kicked up little clouds of dust as he strode down the street, trying to keep his pace steady despite the urgency burning in his chest. The girl, who he would soon learn was named Isabel, trembled in his arms, her slight frame racked with increasingly frequent contractions. Each time a pain gripped her, her fingers would dig into his buckskin shirt, and a small whimper would escape her lips. Though he could tell she was trying to stay quiet, the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and curious faces peered out from shop windows and doorways. A cluster of men outside the general store stopped their conversation to stare openly as he passed. "Well, if that ain't a sight," one of them drawled, loud enough to carry. "Mountain man's got himself a squaw." The mountain man kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched tight. Isabel turned her face against his chest as if trying to hide from the hostile stares and whispered comments that followed their progress down the street. A burly man in a dirty apron stepped off the boardwalk, deliberately crossing their path. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from the mountain man's boots. "Ain't you ashamed, carrying that squaw and her half-breed whelp through decent folks' streets?" The mountain man's fingers tightened protectively around Isabel. He stepped around the man without acknowledging him, feeling the heat of anger burning in his chest. But there wasn't time for confrontations now. Isabel needed help, and quickly. Mrs. Keene's modest house sat at the edge of town, its whitewashed walls and neat flower boxes speaking of care and order. The mountain man had asked directions from a young boy who'd been willing to talk to him, though the child's mother had quickly hustled him away afterward. He took the 3 porch steps in one stride and kicked the door with his boot, unable to knock properly with Isabel in his arms. "Mrs. Keene, need your help here." The door flew open almost immediately. Mrs. Keene stood there in a practical brown dress, her gray hair tied back neatly, shrewd eyes taking in the situation at a glance. "Lord above, bring her in, quick." She stepped aside, gesturing toward an inner door. "Straight through to the birthing room." The mountain man carried Isabel into a small, clean room with a narrow bed. Simple muslin curtains filtered the harsh sunlight, and the air smelled of soap and herbs. Mrs. Keene was right behind them, already rolling up her sleeves. "Put her on the bed, then get yourself out to the pump and bring me fresh water. There's a kettle needs filling in the kitchen, too." She turned her attention to Isabel, as the mountain man carefully laid her down. "There now, girl. Let's see what we're dealing with here." He turned to leave, but Isabel's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, dark eyes wide with fear. "Don't leave me alone." Mrs. Keene's expression softened slightly. "Child, he needs to fetch water, and you need to be properly tended. He'll be back quick enough." She fixed the mountain man with a stern look. "Though what possessed you to let a girl this far along travel so far is beyond me. She's liable to deliver any minute." "Didn't have much choice in the timing," he said gruffly. Then he gently disentangled his hand from Isabel's grip. "I'll be right back. You're safe here." Out at the pump, his muscles worked automatically while his mind churned. He hadn't planned further than getting Isabel away from that auction yard. Now he had a laboring woman and soon a newborn to think about, and his last coins were spent. The water sloshed in the bucket as he carried it inside, his thoughts as turbulent as the disturbed surface. Mrs. Keene had Isabel settled more comfortably, her filthy dress replaced with a clean shift. The girl's face was sheened with sweat, her teeth clenched against another contraction. "My name is Isabel," she managed between pains. "I'm 18 years old." The mountain man nodded, setting down the water. "I'll get the kettle filled. And when you're done with that, there's clean towels need bringing in from the line out back," Mrs. Keene called after him. "Make yourself useful instead of wearing a track in my floors with your pacing." The hours crawled by like wounded things. The sun crept toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple before surrendering to darkness. Mrs. Keene lit lamps, their warm glow making the shadows dance on the walls. Isabel's cries grew sharper, more frequent, impossible to completely muffle despite her obvious attempts to stay quiet. The mountain man found himself unable to leave, even when Mrs. Keene ran out of tasks for him. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching as the midwife moved efficiently around the bed, speaking quiet words of encouragement to Isabel. Each time the girl cried out, he felt it like a physical thing in his chest, stirring memories he'd thought safely buried. Through it all, Isabel kept reaching for his hand during the worst contractions. Her small fingers would wrap around his calloused ones with desperate strength, and he found himself moving closer to the bed each time until finally he was seated in a chair beside her, letting her grip his hand as the pains grew stronger. "You're doing just fine," Mrs. Keene assured her. "The baby's moving down proper now. Won't be too much longer." Outside, the town settled into its nighttime rhythms. Through the window came the sounds of boots on boardwalks, distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional burst of laughter. The mountain man thought of Isabel's stepfather, probably drinking away his silver pieces, and felt his jaw clench again. Isabel's labor intensified as midnight approached. Her cries took on a different quality, and Mrs. Keene's movements became more focused. "That's it, girl. The baby's coming now. Bear down when I tell you." The mountain man started to step back, feeling suddenly out of place, but Isabel's grip on his hand tightened painfully. "Please," she gasped. "Stay." So he stayed, letting her crush his fingers as she pushed, watching in wonder and terror as Mrs. Keene guided her through the final stages of bringing new life into the world. The memories he'd tried so hard to forget came rushing back. Another room, another woman's cries, another midwife's urgent instructions. But this time, instead of death waiting at the end of the pain, there was life. The first light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the curtains when a thin, angry cry pierced the quiet of the room. Mrs. Keene's practiced hands moved swiftly, clearing the baby's airways, checking its limbs, wrapping it in clean linen. "You've got yourself a fine son," she announced, placing the squalling bundle in Isabel's trembling arms. "Good. Strong lungs on him, too." Isabel's face, though pale and exhausted, transformed with wonder as she looked down at her child. Tears spilled from her eyes as she touched his tiny features with gentle fingers. "He's perfect," she whispered. "My beautiful boy." The mountain man found himself unable to look away from the tableau before him. The warm lamplight caught the tears on Isabel's cheeks, the dark fan of her lashes, the way she cradled her son as if he were made of the finest china. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name, or perhaps didn't want to. Mrs. Keene busied herself with the practical aftermath of birth, but he caught her watching him with knowing eyes. "Well," she said finally, "seems like you brought me a bit more excitement than usual for a Tuesday night." Isabel looked up at him then, her dark eyes full of gratitude and something else. Trust, perhaps, or hope. The baby had quieted against her breast, tiny fingers curled into a fist. The mountain man felt the last of his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. He'd spent 2 years building a life of solitude, speaking more to his horse than to people, letting grief be his only companion. But watching Isabel with her newborn son, He felt something he'd thought long dead beginning to stir in his heart. Not love. It was far too soon for that. But purpose, perhaps. A reason to be more than just a shadow moving through the world. Mrs. Keene's voice broke into his thoughts. "You'll both need rest now," she said firmly. "And decisions can wait for daylight proper." The mountain man nodded, finally releasing Isabel's hand. She was already drifting into exhausted sleep, her son secure in her arms. He stepped back, flexing his cramped fingers, and watched as Mrs. Keene tucked a blanket around mother and child. Outside, the town was beginning to wake. Soon there would be questions to answer, problems to solve, decisions to make. But for now, in the quiet of Mrs. Keene's birthing room, there was only the peaceful sound of Isabel's steady breathing and her son's occasional soft sighs. The mountain man felt something inside him shift and settle, like soil after a long drought finally receiving rain. But that fragile peace shattered without warning. Dawn light spilled across the dusty street as the mountain man stepped out of Mrs. Keene's house, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting. The morning air held a bite of autumn, though the sun promised another scorching day ahead. He headed toward the water pump, his boots scuffing against packed earth. Two women in faded calico dresses stood gossiping near the general store's porch. Their voices carried clearly in the morning quiet. "Did you hear about that half-breed girl? The one the mountain man brought to Mrs. Keene's?" The taller woman's voice dripped with scandal. "Heard she had her bastard child in the night. Shameful business, if you ask me." The shorter one clicked her tongue. "And him spending good silver on such as her. Must have gone soft in the head living alone up in those hills." The mountain man's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. The pump's handle creaked as he worked it, filling his bucket with fresh water. More townsfolk were emerging now, and with them came more whispers. "Ruined girl. No better than she ought to be. Fool man. Getting mixed up in such business." The water sloshed against the bucket sides as he made his way back to Mrs. Keene's door. Inside, the house smelled of herbs and fresh linens. Mrs. Keene had opened the windows, letting in morning light and a gentle breeze that stirred the curtains. Isabel lay propped up on clean pillows, her dark hair freshly braided by Mrs. Keene's careful hands. She cradled her son against her breast, whispering softly to him in a mixture of Spanish and Apache. Her voice carried the melody of a prayer, though the mountain man couldn't understand the words. "Nihima, Niyol, Guerrero." She touched the baby's cheek with gentle fingers. "Shijay, Shiyaj." Her eyes held a radiance that transcended her obvious exhaustion. The mountain man set down the water bucket and reached into his pack, pulling out some dried beef and hard biscuits. "Not much, but it'll keep your strength up," he said, offering the food to Isabel. She accepted with a shy smile. "Thank you for everything." Her voice was soft but steady. "I don't even know your name." Before he could answer, Mrs. Keene bustled in with fresh towels. "Well, if you two are planning to talk, you might as well tell her what you mean to do next." She fixed the mountain man with a stern look. "That stepfather of hers will be sobering up soon enough, and I don't imagine he'll be pleased." The mountain man shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how unprepared he was for any of this. "I've got a cabin," he said finally. "North of town, up near Crystal Creek. A day's ride, maybe less. It's small but solid. Goodwell, vegetable patch." He paused, seeing fear flicker across Isabel's face. "You mean to send me away?" Her arms tightened around her son. "No," he said quickly. "No, I meant I could take you there, both of you, if you're willing." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "It's not much, but you'd be safe." Before Isabel could respond, heavy boots thundered on Mrs. Keene's porch. The door burst open without a knock, and Deputy Sheriff Wade strode in, flanked by two rough-looking men. His badge gleamed dully in the morning light, and his hand rested meaningfully on his gun belt. "Well, well," the deputy drawled, his thin lips twisting into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ain't this cozy?" Mrs. Keene stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height. "Deputy Wade, this is a birthing room. You have no business barging in here like this." The deputy pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, waving it with obvious satisfaction. "Got me a warrant. Says different." He turned his cold gaze on Isabel. "This here girl's wanted for theft. Railroad payroll safe taken 3 nights ago. $500 in gold coins missing." Isabel's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "I never. Save your lies for the judge." The deputy took a step forward, but Mrs. Keene moved to block his path. "She gave birth not 6 hours ago," the midwife said firmly. "She's in no condition to be moved, let alone arrested. Where exactly do you propose to take her?" "County jail down in Mesa Bend." The deputy's voice held no compassion. "Judge Williams will be there next week. He can sort it all out then." The mountain man's hands had curled into fists without him realizing it. 3 nights ago, you say?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "When she was already heavy with child, barely able to walk?" The deputy's hand tightened on his gun belt. "Witness says he saw her clear as day, skulking around the railroad office. Maybe she had help. Maybe." His gaze slid meaningfully to the mountain man. "Maybe she still does." Mrs. Keene made a disgusted sound. "This is nonsense, and you know it, Wade. That girl hasn't been anywhere near the railroad office. She's been under my care for days." "Then she won't mind coming down to Mesa Bend to clear things up?" The deputy nodded to his men. "Get her up." The mountain man stepped between them and Isabel. "She's not going anywhere." The deputy's face hardened. "Don't make this worse than it has to be. I'll be back with shackles if I need to." He locked eyes with the mountain man. "And anyone interferes with the law, they'll find themselves sharing her cell." Isabel's baby began to cry, a thin wail that seemed to fill the suddenly silent room. She tried to comfort him, but her hands were shaking. The mountain man held the deputy's stare, reading the mixture of satisfaction and malice in the other man's eyes. This wasn't about justice or stolen gold. This was about power, about grinding down those deemed lesser, about a corrupt man's pleasure in causing pain. "You've made your point," Mrs. Keene said coldly. "Now get out of my house. I have a patient to tend to." The deputy tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. "I'll be back at sundown. Have her ready." He turned to go, then paused in the doorway. "Oh, and mountain man, don't get any clever ideas about riding north. My men will be watching the trails." With that, he and his deputies clumped back onto the porch and down the steps. When they were gone, Isabel began to cry silently, tears sliding down her cheeks as she clutched her son. "I never stole anything," she whispered. "Never even been near that office. But they won't believe me. No one ever believes me." The mountain man knelt beside her bed, his voice gentle but firm. "I believe you." Mrs. Keene was already gathering supplies, her movements sharp with anger. "Of course we believe you. That deputy's been in the railroad's pocket ever since the tracks came through here. Always finding convenient criminals when the company needs someone to blame." The mountain man watched Isabel trying to quiet her still fussing son, saw the fear in her eyes warring with exhaustion. She looked so young, so vulnerable. Yet there was a core of strength in the way she held herself, in how she focused on soothing her child despite her own terror. "We've got until sundown," he said quietly, "to figure something out." Mrs. Keene nodded grimly. "And figure something out we will. I didn't bring that baby safely into this world just to see him orphaned by injustice." Isabel looked between them, hope beginning to edge out some of the fear in her expression. The mountain man met her gaze steadily, letting her see the promise in his eyes. He had bought her freedom once already. He would find a way to defend it again. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, promising another scorching day. Time was already slipping away from them, and somewhere in town, Deputy Wade was surely making his preparations. But in Mrs. Keene's front room, 3 people and a newborn child formed an unlikely alliance against corruption, their determination as solid as the mountains rising in the distance. They had a plan, but they were running out of time. By mid-afternoon, shadows had begun to stretch across Mrs. Keene's yard. The mountain man hitched his borrowed wagon closer to her back door, away from prying eyes. Inside, Isabel cradled her sleeping son while Mrs. Keene packed a basket with supplies. "Fresh bandages, herbs for tea, and some of my own preserves," the midwife said, tucking a warm blanket around Isabel's shoulders. "That cabin of yours gets mighty cold at night," she added, fixing the mountain man with a stern look. "Much obliged, ma'am." He helped Isabel stand, supporting her weight as she took unsteady steps. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but determination showed in every movement. "The deputy won't think to check my back gate for hours yet," Mrs. Keene whispered, "but you best hurry all the same." The mountain man lifted Isabel into the wagon bed, where he'd arranged hay and blankets into a makeshift bed. Her son stirred, but didn't wake as she settled him against her chest. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they pulled away from Mrs. Keene's house, taking the lesser-used dirt road that wound north through scrubland. They traveled in silence for the first hour, the wagon's wheels creaking softly. Isabel dozed, but each time the wagon hit a rut, her eyes would snap open, checking her baby's face. Finally, as they passed a stand of cottonwoods, she spoke. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about why they're really after me." The mountain man didn't turn, but he nodded, encouraging her to continue. "My stepfather," she swallowed hard. "He worked for the railroad before the drinking got bad. He knew where they kept the payroll bonds, knew when the safe would be full." Her hands trembled as she adjusted the baby's blanket. "3 nights ago, he came home late, reeking of whiskey. He had scratches on his hands, dirt under his nails. Next morning, he was flashing silver dollars at the saloon." The wagon rolled over a patch of rocky ground, and Isabel winced. The mountain man slowed the horses, choosing his next words carefully. "You think he took those bonds himself?" She nodded. "The deputy. He's been in my stepfather's pocket for months. I've seen them whispering in the alley behind the saloon, always after the railroad payroll comes through." Tears welled in her eyes. "When I threatened to tell what I knew, that's when my stepfather decided to sell me." The mountain man's jaw tightened. The pieces were falling into place, the deputy's eagerness to arrest her. The stepfather's sudden wealth after the auction. It wasn't just about silencing her. They needed someone to take the blame, and a poor, half-Apache girl was the perfect target. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. A cool wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. The baby woke, beginning to fuss, and Isabel rocked him gently. "Not much further now," the mountain man said softly. He guided the wagon off the main trail onto a narrower track that wound through a grove of ponderosa pines. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and Isabel pulled the blanket tighter around herself and the baby. Finally, as twilight settled over the land, they crested a small rise. There, nestled against a backdrop of towering pines, stood a sturdy log cabin. It wasn't large, maybe 20 feet square, but the walls were solid and the roof well-maintained. A small corral stood empty to one side, and Isabel could make out the shapes of garden rows behind the cabin. The mountain man helped her down from the wagon, supporting her weight as she took uncertain steps. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging from an iron arm. A narrow bed with a quilt occupied one corner, while shelves lined with provisions took up another. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat beneath the window. "It ain't much," he said almost apologetically as he lit the oil lamp hanging from a ceiling beam. The warm light filled the space, catching the worn smoothness of the floorboards, the neat stack of firewood by the hearth. "It's perfect," Isabel whispered, meaning it. After months of her stepfather's squalid shack, this tidy cabin felt like a palace. The mountain man busied himself at the fireplace, building up the flames and setting a pot of beans to warm. The familiar motions of preparing a meal seemed to ease something in him. He mixed cornmeal and water in a cast-iron skillet, adding a pinch of salt before setting it near the fire to bake. Isabel settled into one of the chairs, arranging her shawl to nurse her son. The baby latched eagerly, and she felt herself relax for the first time in days. The cabin was warm, the air rich with the smell of wood smoke and baking bread. Outside, a coyote called, answered by another farther away. The mountain man moved quietly around the cabin, setting out tin plates and cups, checking the beans. When the cornbread was done, he broke it into generous pieces, steam rising from the golden crust. Before sitting down, he bowed his head. "Lord," he said softly, "we thank you for this food, for safe travels, and for—" He paused, and Isabel saw moisture glisten in his eyes. "For new beginnings. Amen." "Amen," Isabel echoed, surprising herself. She hadn't prayed properly since her mother died, but something about his simple faith touched her. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the pop of the fire and the baby's occasional coos. The beans were well seasoned, the cornbread still warm, and Isabel found herself hungrier than she'd realized. The mountain man refilled her plate without comment, a gentle understanding in his eyes. But outside, the night deepened. More coyotes joined the chorus, their songs echoing off the distant ridges. And there was another sound, too faint to be certain, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth, quickly stilled. High on a ridge overlooking the cabin, a lone rider sat motionless in his saddle. The stepfather's eyes narrowed as he watched smoke curl from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the window. His hand strayed to the flask in his coat pocket, but for once, he didn't drink. He had other business tonight. Turning his horse, he melted back into the darkness, leaving only disturbed dust and bent grass as evidence he'd ever been there. In the cabin, Isabel laid her sleeping son in a makeshift cradle, a wooden box the mountain man had quickly lined with soft blankets. The baby's face was peaceful, one tiny fist curled near his cheek. She touched his downy head gently, marveling at how complete her love for him already was. The mountain man banked the fire for the night, his movements practiced and sure. "You take the bed," he said quietly. "I'll sleep near the door." He didn't mention the extra check he'd made of his rifle, or the way his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the window. Some things didn't need saying. They were safe, for now, but they weren't free. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the frost-covered ground in pale golden light. The air held that peculiar mountain clarity that made distant objects seem closer than they were. Inside the cabin, Isabel stirred from her fitful sleep, her body aching from childbirth. The baby lay beside her in his makeshift cradle, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Through the window, she watched the mountain man's steady rhythm as he swung an axe. Each stroke sent wood chips flying, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He'd been at it since before sunrise, building up the wood pile that would keep them warm through the coming days. Isabel eased herself up carefully, wincing at the soreness that seemed to reach into every muscle. The fire had burned low during the night, but enough embers remained to coax new flames from the kindling. She added small sticks one by one, just as she'd watched her mother do countless times before. The baby began to fuss, his little face scrunching up before letting out a cry. Isabel lifted him gently, cradling him close as she settled into the chair near the fireplace. As she nursed him, Her eyes took in the cabin's interior with fresh morning clarity. Everything spoke of careful maintenance: the swept floors, the organized shelves, the neat stack of dishes. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. It was safe. The door opened with a gentle creak as the mountain man stepped inside, bringing with him a rush of cold air and the sharp scent of pine. He stamped his boots clean, setting an armload of split wood beside the hearth. "Morning," he said softly, careful not to startle the nursing baby. "Sleep all right?" Isabel nodded, though dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "Better than I have in months," she admitted. It was true. Even with her fears, the cabin's sturdy walls felt like a fortress compared to her stepfather's shack. The mountain man moved to the stove, where coffee already perked in a battered tin pot. He poured 2 cups, offering one to Isabel. She accepted it with her free hand, savoring the warmth that seeped through the tin. "When you're feeling stronger," he said, settling into the other chair, "I'll show you around the place. Need to know where everything is, how things work out here." He paused, studying the flames. "Frontier living ain't easy, but it's possible if you know what you're doing." After breakfast, cornmeal mush with the last of his molasses, the mountain man helped Isabel wrap the baby warmly. Despite his gentle reminder that she should rest, she insisted on seeing the property. They stepped out into the crisp morning air, the baby secure in her arms. "Barn's not much," he said, leading her to the small structure, "but it keeps the animals warm." Inside, 2 goats greeted them with curious bleats. "They give good milk, once you get the hang of milking them." A few chickens scratched in the straw, and the hayloft above was stacked with fresh-cut hay. He showed her the root cellar next, dug into the hillside behind the cabin. Shelves lined the walls, holding preserved vegetables, dried meat, and sacks of flour and beans. "Winter's coming," he explained. "Got to be prepared." Isabel took it all in, noting how everything had its place, its purpose. This wasn't just survival, it was a life, carefully built. Though she sensed an emptiness in it, spaces where family should have been. They made their way back to the cabin's front porch, where 2 rough-hewn chairs faced the morning sun. The mountain man insisted Isabel sit, bringing her a blanket against the chill. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping fresh coffee, watching sunlight filter through the pine branches. The baby, who had been dozing, suddenly hiccuped loudly against Isabel's shoulder. The unexpected sound startled a laugh from both of them. A real laugh, perhaps their first since meeting. Isabel's eyes widened at the sound of her own mirth, and the mountain man's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. The moment of lightness lingered as they shared stories over a simple lunch of beans and the last of the cornbread. Isabel spoke of her mother's cooking, the songs she used to sing while working. The mountain man mentioned his own wife's garden, how she'd known just when to plant each crop. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Isabel worked up the courage to ask about the photograph she'd noticed on the shelf. A woman holding a baby, both smiling at the camera. The mountain man's face grew distant but not closed. "Sarah and little Mary," he said quietly. "Smallpox took them, 2 winters ago. Mary was just 6 months old." He looked down at his hands. "Didn't think I'd ever have folks in this cabin again." Before Isabel could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful atmosphere. The mountain man was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. His expression hardened as he recognized the riders. "Deputy," he said grimly. "2 men with him." He turned to Isabel, who had gone pale. "Get in the back room with the baby. Stay quiet." Isabel hurried to comply as 3 horses clattered into the yard. The mountain man stepped onto the porch, his stance casual but alert. The deputy sat high in his saddle, a badge glinting on his vest. His companions, rough-looking men Isabel didn't recognize, flanked him with hands near their gun belts. "Evening," the mountain man said evenly. Long ride from town. The deputy's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but his eyes remained cold. You know why we're here. The girl's wanted for theft. Hand her over and we'll forget your part in harboring her. Got a warrant? The mountain man asked, not moving from his position in front of the door. Don't need one when pursuing a known criminal, the deputy snapped. Step aside. Actually, you do. The mountain man's voice remained calm, but steel ran through it. This is my property. You want to search it, you come back with proper papers. One of the deputy's companions shifted in his saddle, hand moving closer to his holster. The mountain man didn't appear to notice, but Isabel, watching through a crack in the wall, saw how his weight shifted slightly, ready for trouble. The deputy's face darkened. You're making a mistake, old man. That half-breed thief ain't worth dying over. Seems to me, the mountain man said quietly, you're mighty eager to arrest a girl who just gave birth. Might make folks wonder why. His eyes locked with the deputy's. Might make them ask questions about who really took those bonds. The deputy's hand tightened on his reins. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he yanked his horse's head around. We'll be back, he snarled, with more men, with papers. You best reconsider your position before then. The three riders spurred their horses, kicking up dust as they galloped away. The mountain man watched until they disappeared around the bend, then came back inside. Isabel stood in the doorway of the back room, clutching her son, trembling. They'll come back, she whispered. They'll bring more men, just like he said. The mountain man crossed to her, his face gentle but determined. Let them come, he said softly. I gave my word when I bought your freedom. I mean to keep it. He looked down at the baby, sleeping peacefully despite the tension. You and your son are under my protection now, no matter what comes. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. But why? She asked. Why risk everything for us? The mountain man was quiet for a long moment, looking at the photograph on the shelf. Because it's right, he said finally, and because everyone deserves a chance at safety, at family. He turned back to her, his eyes steady. We'll face whatever comes together. As evening settled over the cabin, Isabel stirred the soup she'd insisted on making, watching the mountain man check the windows and doors. Outside, wind whispered through the pines, carrying the first hint of winter. Despite her fear, despite the threat hanging over them, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The mountain man took his place near the door, rifle close at hand. He wouldn't sleep much tonight, she knew. But his presence, solid and unwavering, told her more than words could. Whatever tomorrow brought, she and her son were no longer alone. They had pushed back the darkness, but it was regrouping, and it would be back. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds as the mountain man saddled his horse. The morning air held a sharp chill, promising winter's approach. Inside the cabin, Isabel stood near the fireplace, her baby sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box lined with soft blankets. Mrs. Keene's niece should be here soon, he said, adjusting his coat. Sarah Beth knows how to handle herself, and she'll keep you both safe while I'm in town. He checked his rifle before sliding it into the saddle scabbard. Got a list of supplies we need. Shouldn't be gone more than half a day. Isabel nodded, though worry creased her brow. Be careful, she said softly. The deputy? Don't you fret about him, the mountain man interrupted gently. Town's got plenty of folks who still believe in doing what's right. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Sarah Beth's arrival. The young woman, barely 20 herself, dismounted with practiced ease. Her friendly face and quick smile immediately put Isabel at ease. Ma sent fresh bread, Sarah Beth announced, producing a cloth-wrapped loaf that still held warmth from her mother's oven. And Aunt Margaret. Mrs. Keene, that is, sent herbs for the baby. Help him sleep better. The mountain man mounted his horse, checking the position of the sun. Much obliged for coming, Sarah Beth. Your aunt's a good woman. That she is, Sarah Beth agreed, already moving to help Isabel with the morning chores. Now get along with you. We'll be just fine here. The trail into town wound through stands of pine and across open meadows where early frost sparkled on the grass. The mountain man rode steadily, his mind churning over the challenges ahead. He'd need more than supplies to protect Isabel and her child. Near the outskirts of town, he encountered Reverend Thomas walking the road, Bible tucked under his arm. The preacher raised a hand in greeting, and the mountain man reined his horse to a stop. Morning, Reverend. Good morning, Thomas replied, his usually cheerful face grave. I'm glad to meet you. There's trouble brewing in town you should know about. The mountain man dismounted, leading his horse as they walked together. The Reverend's words tumbled out, painting a dark picture of growing unrest. Rumors are spreading fast. The deputy's been telling anyone who will listen that Isabel's a thief, that you're harboring a criminal. Thomas shook his head. Some folks are calling for both of you to be arrested. Even good people, God-fearing people, are getting caught up in it. Truth's got to count for something, the mountain man said quietly. It does, Thomas agreed. But truth needs voices willing to speak it. My wife and Mrs. Keene have been defending Isabel, but... He hesitated. Well, you'll see for yourself in town. They parted ways at the church, the Reverend's warning hanging heavy in the air. The mountain man led his horse down the main street, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed him. The general store's bell jangled as he entered. Old Mr. Peterson behind the counter gave him a curt nod, nothing like his usual friendly greeting. As the mountain man gathered supplies, flour, lamp oil, coffee, sugar, conversations around him died to tense silence. Heard that Indian girl's still up at your place? Peterson said as he totaled the purchases, his voice pitched to Carrie. Half Apache, half Mexican, the mountain man corrected mildly. And yes, she is. Deputy says she stole railroad bonds. Serious business, that. Deputy says a lot of things. The mountain man counted out coins carefully. Truth will come out soon enough. Back outside, he secured the supplies to his pack horse. A group of men lounged outside the saloon, watching him with hostile eyes. He ignored them, checking his cinch straps with deliberate care. The ride back to the cabin seemed longer, weighted with the news he carried. The sun had passed its peak when he finally arrived, finding Isabel and Sarah Beth on the porch. The baby lay contentedly in Isabel's arms as she sang softly in Apache, her voice carrying haunting melodies across the yard. Sarah Beth looked up from her mending. She's been teaching me bits of the song, she said cheerfully. It's about rain, bringing life to the desert. The mountain man nodded, unloading supplies. My thanks for staying, Sarah Beth. Your pa expecting you home soon? Yes, but I'll come back tomorrow if you need me. She gathered her things, mounting her horse with a final wave to Isabel. Inside the cabin, Isabel continued humming as she prepared their evening meal. The baby slept nearby, tiny fingers curled into fists. The mountain man waited until the food was ready before sharing what he'd learned in town. Deputies called for a hearing, he said finally, watching her face carefully. 3 days from now. He means to have you jailed until then. Isabel's hands trembled as she set down her spoon. Jailed? But the baby? We won't let that happen, he assured her firmly. But we need to be ready. Need to prove you're innocent. How? Her voice cracked. It's my word against the deputy and my stepfather. Who will believe me? The mountain man was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Sometimes, he said slowly, a man gets a second chance to do right in this world, to protect those who need protecting. He looked up, meeting her questioning gaze. Lost my wife, Sarah, and our baby girl, Mary, to smallpox 2 winters back. Thought my life was over then. Thought there wasn't any purpose left. Isabel's eyes softened with understanding. That is why you helped us at the auction. He nodded, emotion making his voice rough. Couldn't stand by and watch another mother and child suffer. Not when I had the means to help. He cleared his throat. And now I mean to see it through. We'll face this hearing together, prove your innocence. But how can you be sure? Isabel asked softly. How can you know I'm not guilty? The mountain man's eyes were steady as he looked at her. Because I've seen your heart, Isabel. Seen how you care for your son. How you keep your faith even when you're afraid. That's not the heart of a thief. Tears spilled down Isabel's cheeks. I never thanked you properly, she whispered, for saving us that day, for giving us a home. No thanks needed, he replied gruffly, just doing what any decent man would do. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. The baby stirred, making small sounds in his sleep. Isabel hummed another lullaby, this one in Spanish, while the mountain man added wood to the fire. My mother taught me these songs, she said after a while. She said music helps babies grow strong in spirit. A sad smile touched her lips. She died when I was 12. That is when my stepfather. You don't have to talk about it, the mountain man said gently. No, I want to. Isabel straightened her shoulders. People should know the truth. He was cruel from the start, but when he lost his railroad job, he became worse. He drank, gambled away our money. Then the bonds went missing from the payroll safe. He told everyone I took them, that I was ungrateful, wild. Her voice hardened. But I never touched those bonds. I was caring for my mother's sister, who was sick with fever. The mountain man nodded slowly. That's something we can prove. Your aunt can testify. She died last month, Isabel said quietly. That is when my stepfather decided to sell me. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. But we'll find other ways to show the truth. The Reverend believes you. Mrs. Keene, too. Good people will stand with us. Isabel looked around the cabin, at the warm firelight dancing on rough-hewn walls, at her son sleeping peacefully. I never thought to find kindness again, she admitted. After my mother died, I thought I would always be alone. The mountain man stood, moving to check the doors and windows as was his habit before night fell completely. Not alone anymore, he said simply. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Outside, wind sighed through the pines, carrying the first scent of snow. Isabel tucked the blanket more securely around her sleeping son, then began clearing away their supper dishes. The mountain man sat in his chair near the door, rifle close at hand, watching over his unlikely family as stars emerged in the darkening sky. They had allies, but the whole town was being turned against them. Their only hope lay in a hearing that was designed to be their doom. Gray clouds rolled across the morning sky, heavy with the promise of rain. The mountain man stood on his cabin porch, studying the weather while coffee steamed in his tin cup. Behind him, the door creaked open, and Isabel stepped out, her baby wrapped snugly against her chest. Looks like rain coming, she said softly, joining him at the railing. He nodded. Might hold off till afternoon. He glanced at her, noting color returning to her cheeks. How are you feeling today? Stronger. Isabel straightened her shoulders. Strong enough to help with chores if you will let me. The mountain man hesitated. Mrs. Keene said you need rest. Please, Isabel interrupted. I cannot sit idle while you do everything. My mother taught me to work hard, to pull my weight. She smiled slightly. Besides, the baby sleeps better when I move around. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Goats need milking. You know how? Yes, my aunt kept goats. Isabel's eyes brightened with purpose. I will get a bucket. Together they walked to the small barn, where 3 nanny goats waited impatiently. Isabel settled on the milking stool, adjusting her son so he stayed secure while she worked. Her hands moved with practiced ease, streams of warm milk hitting the bucket's bottom with a steady rhythm. The mountain man leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You've done this before, all right?" "My aunt said I had gentle hands," Isabel replied, not looking up. "The goats never kicked when I milked them." As if to prove her point, the usually fractious brown nanny stood perfectly still under her touch. The mountain man shook his head, impressed. When the milking was done, they carried water from the creek, Isabel insisting on helping despite his protests. "The roof needs patching before the rain comes," he said as they finished. "I'll handle that." "I can hand you tools," Isabel offered quickly, "and supplies." He studied her determined expression and relented. "All right, but if you get tired—" "I will rest," she promised. "I know my limits." The morning passed in steady work. Isabel proved as capable as she'd claimed, anticipating needs and working efficiently. When the mountain man descended the ladder after fixing the last loose shingle, he found her humming softly while sweeping the porch, her son sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle nearby. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense, but it was only Mrs. Keene riding up, her saddlebags bulging. "Brought you some fresh bread?" she announced, dismounting stiffly. "And news from town." She eyed Isabel appraisingly. "You're looking better, child. Getting your strength back?" "Yes, ma'am," Isabel replied. "I have been helping with chores." Mrs. Keene nodded approval. "Good. Moving around will help you heal." She settled into a porch chair, accepting the coffee Isabel offered. "Now then, about Sunday service tomorrow." Isabel stilled. "Sunday service?" "Best thing you could do is attend," Mrs. Keene said firmly. "Show folks you're not hiding, that you've nothing to be ashamed of." She sipped her coffee. "Some minds might change, seeing you there with your baby, joining in worship proper, like." "But—" Isabel's voice wavered. "The way people look at me, the things they say." "Which is exactly why you should come," Mrs. Keene insisted. "Hold your head high. Show them your true character." She glanced at the mountain man. "You'll escort her?" "Of course," he nodded. "Plan to." Isabel twisted her apron in her hands. "What if? What if they make us leave?" "They won't," Mrs. Keene said firmly. "Reverend Thomas won't allow it. Neither will his wife." She reached for Isabel's hand. "Have courage, child. God's house should welcome all his children." After Mrs. Keene departed, Isabel remained quiet, lost in thought. The mountain man gave her space, knowing she needed to decide for herself. Finally, as evening approached, she spoke. "I will go," she said softly. "My mother always said faith gives strength. Perhaps it will help others see the truth about me." Sunday dawned cool and damp, the promised rain having fallen through the night. Isabel dressed carefully in her cleanest dress, wrapping her son in a soft blanket Mrs. Keene had brought. The mountain man hitched up the wagon, noting how Isabel's hands trembled as he helped her up to the seat. The small white clapboard church came into view all too soon. Wagons and horses already crowded the yard, and Isabel's grip on her baby tightened as curious faces turned their way. The mountain man helped her down, standing close as they approached the church steps. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Some turned away pointedly, while others stared with open hostility. Isabel's steps faltered, but then Martha Thomas, the preacher's wife, hurried forward. "Isabel, dear, I'm so glad you came," she said warmly, taking Isabel's hand. "Come sit with me in the front pew. There's plenty of room." Surprised murmurs followed as Martha led Isabel down the aisle. The mountain man took his usual place near the back, watching protectively. As the congregation settled, Reverend Thomas stepped to the pulpit, his kind eyes sweeping the assembly. "Let us begin with Amazing Grace," he announced. The organ wheezed to life, and voices rose in familiar harmony. At first, Isabel merely mouthed the words, but as the second verse began, her clear soprano lifted hesitantly. Martha Thomas smiled in encouragement, and Isabel's voice grew stronger, pure and sweet as morning light through stained glass. For that brief time, the usual barriers seemed to fade. Even those who had turned away found themselves drawn into the shared music, the ancient words of grace and redemption. The mountain man watched Isabel's face transform with joy as she sang, her son sleeping peacefully in her arms. After the final hymn, as people filed out for coffee and conversation in the yard, several women approached Isabel cautiously. She answered their tentative questions about the baby with gentle dignity, and soon small smiles appeared. The mountain man stood nearby, sharing coffee with other men, though he noted some still muttered darkly and kept their distance. "Fine voice she has," Joe Miller commented gruffly. "Reminds me of my Maria. God rest her soul." Others nodded agreement, and for a moment it seemed acceptance might be possible. Then the deputy's voice cut through the peaceful morning air. "Enjoying your last taste of freedom?" he called to Isabel, striding up with his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. "Come tomorrow's hearing, you'll be seeing the inside of a jail cell." The brief warmth of fellowship shattered. People drew back, remembered prejudices surfacing in their eyes. Isabel clutched her son closer but held her head high. "The truth will come out," she said quietly. "Truth?" The deputy laughed harshly. "The truth is you're nothing but a thieving." "That's enough." The mountain man interrupted, stepping between them. "This is God's house, deputy. Show some respect." The deputy's face darkened. "You're in this deep enough already, old man. Don't make it worse." He spat in the dust. "Tomorrow at noon. Don't be late." He turned on his heel and stalked away. Martha Thomas squeezed Isabel's hand. "Don't let him frighten you, dear. We're praying for justice to prevail." The drive back to the cabin was quiet, both lost in thought about the coming hearing. But as they crested the last hill, Isabel spoke softly. "Thank you for bringing me today." Even with the deputy's threats, it helped to sing those hymns, to feel. She paused, searching for words. To feel human again, even for a little while. The mountain man nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes a person needed to be reminded they weren't alone in the world, that hope could survive even in the darkest times. He'd learned that himself after losing Sarah and Mary. They spent the rest of that Sunday preparing for tomorrow's hearing, gathering what evidence they could, though both knew it might not be enough against the deputy's determination to see Isabel jailed. Still, for a few precious hours that morning, she had found acceptance in shared worship, had lifted her voice in praise alongside those who might yet become neighbors instead of accusers. It wasn't much, perhaps, but it was something to hold on to as they faced whatever tomorrow might bring. They thought they had until noon the next day. They were wrong. Thunder rolled across the mountains like distant drums as darkness settled over the cabin. The storm that had threatened all afternoon finally arrived, bringing sheets of rain that drummed against the sturdy log walls. Inside, lamplight cast warm shadows as Isabel gently rocked her son, humming softly to keep him calm through the growing tempest. The mountain man sat at the rough-hewn table, working steadily at mending a broken harness strap. His weathered hands moved with practiced skill, the leather awl punching neat holes as he watched Isabel from the corner of his eye. The peaceful scene felt almost domestic, though he knew tomorrow's hearing loomed over them like the storm clouds outside. A particularly loud crack of thunder made the cabin windows rattle. The baby startled and began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching up in distress. Isabel adjusted him against her shoulder, patting his back soothingly. "Shh, mi angelito," she whispered. "Es solo la lluvia." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in stark white for a moment. In that brief flash, the mountain man caught the worry in Isabel's eyes as she gazed down at her son. He set aside his work, sensing she needed to talk. "Storm's got you troubled?" he asked quietly. Isabel shook her head, then hesitated. "Not the storm, exactly. Just thinking about tomorrow. About my stepfather." She drew a deep breath. "There's something I haven't told you yet. Something I saw." The mountain man turned his chair to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "I'm listening." "When I worked at the railroad camp," she began, then paused as another rumble of thunder shook the cabin. "My stepfather made me carry heavy sacks for the railroad men. Tools, supplies, whatever they needed. He said it would make me stronger, but I think he just wanted to humiliate me." Her voice grew bitter at the memory. The mountain man's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "One night, very late, I was returning from delivering supplies to the night crew. I wasn't supposed to be there, but my stepfather had insisted." She shifted the baby to her other shoulder, her movements gentle despite her growing agitation. "I saw him near the paymaster's office. He was opening a strongbox, taking papers out." The mountain man leaned forward. "Papers? What kind of papers?" "They looked official. Had fancy writing on them like the kind you see on banknotes." Isabel's voice dropped lower. "He didn't see me watching, but the next morning, there was all this commotion about missing railroad bonds." Lightning flashed again, followed almost immediately by a thunderclap that made the cabin's timbers creak. The baby began crying in earnest now, his wails competing with the storm's fury. "Those must have been the stolen bonds," the mountain man said, excitement growing in his voice. "Isabel, this could prove your innocence. If we can get your stepfather to—" He broke off, as Isabel suddenly gasped, pressing her hand to her son's forehead. "He feels warm," she said, panic edging into her voice. "Too warm. What if he's sick? What if—" "Here," the mountain man said, rising quickly. "Let me help." He held out his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Isabel carefully transferred the crying infant to him. With the practiced ease of a former father, he cradled the baby against his chest, one large hand supporting the tiny head. He began to rock slowly, his deep voice humming an old hymn that Sarah used to sing to their Mary. The familiar motion brought a sharp pang of memory, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the present need. "Babies often feel warm when they're upset," he explained softly to Isabel. "The crying and the storm probably got him worked up. See? He's already settling." True enough, the child's cries were subsiding to hiccuping whimpers. Isabel watched in amazement as her son's eyes began to droop, soothed by the mountain man's gentle rocking and steady humming. "You're good with him," she whispered. He gave a small, sad smile, but didn't reply. Instead, he continued rocking until the baby was fully asleep, then carefully handed him back to Isabel. She settled him in the makeshift cradle near her chair, tucking the blanket around him with tender care. "About what you saw at the railroad camp," the mountain man said, keeping his voice low. "We need to confront your stepfather with this. Make him confess." Isabel's face paled. "He'll deny it, and he's dangerous when he's cornered." "Maybe so, but it's our best chance to clear your name." He returned to his chair, mind working through possibilities. "If we can get him to slip up, admit something in front of witnesses." "The deputy won't help," Isabel said bitterly. "He's in my stepfather's pocket somehow. I've seen them whispering together in town." "Then we'll find others who will listen. The Reverend, maybe. Mrs. Keene." He leaned forward earnestly. "Isabel, this is the first real evidence we've had. We can't ignore it." She nodded slowly, though fear still shadowed her eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows in heavy sheets. Lightning split the sky again, and in that brilliant moment, a dark figure on horseback was silhouetted against the ridge above the cabin. Isabel saw it too and grabbed the mountain man's arm. "There! Did you see?" He was already on his feet, moving to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could just make out the rider turning away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the ridge. "Your stepfather," he said grimly. "Been watching us, I reckon." Isabel hurried to check on the baby, as if her stepfather's mere presence might somehow harm him. "What does he want? Why can't he just leave us alone?" "Because you're a threat to him now," the mountain man replied, still staring out into the storm-dark night. "You know too much. He'll try something before the hearing tomorrow, I'm betting." A tremendous crash of thunder made them both jump. The baby stirred but didn't wake, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. Isabel sank back into her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Not just of him, but of what might happen tomorrow. If they take me away, what will happen to my son?" The mountain man turned from the window, his expression resolute. "That won't happen. I gave you my word I'd protect you both, and I mean to keep it." He crossed to the fireplace, adding another log to keep the warmth steady through the night. "Try to get some rest. I'll keep watch." Isabel nodded gratefully, gathering her sleeping child close. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He simply nodded, settling back into his chair with a clear view of both the door and windows. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains, while somewhere in that darkness, a man with murder in his heart planned his next move. The mountain man's hand strayed to the rifle propped beside his chair. He'd lost one family to forces beyond his control. He wouldn't lose another to human evil, not while he drew breath. Through the long hours of the storm-racked night, he kept his vigil, watching over the sleeping mother and child, while planning how to turn Isabel's revelation into the proof they desperately needed. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now his only duty was to keep them safe until dawn. But their enemies weren't waiting for the hearing. They were coming tonight. Morning dawned crisp and bright after the storm, sunlight glinting off rain-drenched pine needles. The mountain man stepped onto his cabin's porch, scanning the clearing for signs of intrusion. Nothing seemed disturbed, but fresh hoofprints in the mud confirmed his suspicions. The stepfather had indeed been watching them. Inside, Isabel was already awake, nursing her son near the warmth of the freshly stoked fire. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes questioning. "You're going to town, aren't you?" He nodded, buckling on his gun belt. "Need to track your stepfather's movements. See what he's up to before the hearing." "I'm coming with you," Isabel said firmly, rising with the baby cradled against her chest. When he started to protest, she shook her head. "Please, I don't want to stay here alone, not after seeing him last night." The mountain man considered arguing, but recognized the determined set of her jaw. Truth be told, he wasn't comfortable leaving them unprotected either. "All right," he agreed finally, "but we'll need to be careful. Stay close to me." While Isabel wrapped the baby warmly and gathered what they'd need, the mountain man saddled his horse. He'd borrowed an old mare from Mrs. Keen for Isabel, gentle enough for a novice rider carrying an infant. The morning air was cool, but promised warmth later, the storm-washed sky a perfect autumn blue. "Here," he said, helping Isabel mount side saddle, making sure she was steady with the baby secured in a sling across her chest. "We'll take it slow." They rode at an easy pace, following the winding trail down from the foothills toward town. The baby dozed contentedly, lulled by the gentle motion. Isabel's face was drawn with tension, but she sat straight in the saddle, determined. As they approached the outskirts of town, the mountain man guided them off the main road, taking a less obvious route behind the livery stable. He didn't want to announce their presence too openly. The streets were busy with morning traffic. Wagons delivering goods, women heading to the general store, miners trudging toward the saloon for their first drink of the day. They tied their horses in a quiet alley behind the mercantile where they could watch the saloon's side entrance without being obvious. The mountain man helped Isabel dismount, then positioned her in the shadow of a storage shed where she could observe while staying hidden. "There," she whispered suddenly, gripping his arm. Through the saloon's grimy window, they could see her stepfather seated at a table with a well-dressed stranger. Papers were spread between them. The mountain man's eyes narrowed. "Stay here," he murmured. "I'm going to get closer. See if I can hear what they're saying." Moving with the casual air of someone just passing by, he edged closer to the window. Years of hunting had taught him how to move quietly, how to blend into the background. He positioned himself near a stack of empty barrels, close enough to catch fragments of conversation drifting through the partially open window. "Genuine railroad bonds," the stepfather was saying, his voice eager. "Worth 500 each. I'll let them go for half that." The trader, a sharp-featured man in an Eastern suit, examined one of the papers carefully. "These were reported stolen last month. Could be trouble." The stepfather waved dismissively. "No trouble. Deputy's taking care of that. Got some half-breed girl to blame it on." The mountain man's jaw clenched at the casual cruelty, but he forced himself to stay still, listening. Just then, bootsteps approached from the street. The deputy himself appeared, entering the saloon through the front door. The mountain man watched as he approached the table, exchanging a complex handshake with the stepfather, clearly a prearranged signal. "Everything settled?" the deputy asked quietly. The trader nodded. "Just concluding our business. You're sure this won't come back on any of us?" "Got it all arranged," the deputy assured him. "The girl will take the fall. Trials tomorrow. She'll be headed to territorial prison by week's end." The mountain man had heard enough. He slipped back to where Isabel waited, her face pale with anxiety. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." They mounted quickly and rode out of town by the back way, not speaking until they were well clear of the buildings. Only then did the mountain man relay what he'd overheard, watching Isabel's face grow harder with each detail. "So it's true," she said bitterly. "They planned it all. My own stepfather." "We heard him admit to having the bonds," the mountain man reminded her. "And now we know the deputy's part in it too. That's something we can use." They rode the rest of the way to the cabin in tense silence, each lost in thought. The baby woke and fussed briefly, but Isabel soothed him with soft words in Apache. By the time they reached home, the sun was past its peak. Inside the cabin, Isabel paced while the mountain man built up the fire. "What do we do now?" she asked finally, settling in her chair to nurse the baby. "Who would believe us against the deputy's word?" "We need witnesses," the mountain man said, pulling his chair closer to the fire. "People who've seen your stepfather with those bonds or heard him talking about them. The trader might talk if pressed. He seemed nervous about handling stolen goods." "The Reverend might help," Isabel suggested. "He believed in me enough to let me come to church. And Mrs. Keene. She knows I couldn't have stolen anything, not while I was so close to giving birth." The mountain man nodded slowly. "We'll need them both. But you realize what this means." He looked at her seriously. "You'll have to testify. Tell what you saw that night at the railroad camp. Are you willing to do that?" Isabel's arms tightened around her son, but her voice was steady. "Yes, I have to. For him." She looked down at the baby's peaceful face. "I want him to grow up knowing his mother stood up for the truth, not hiding from it." "It won't be easy," the mountain man warned. "Your stepfather won't go down without a fight, and the deputy has the law on his side, or seems to." "I know." Fear flickered in her eyes, but determination won out. But I'm not alone anymore, and I'm tired of being afraid. The lamp's warm glow filled the cabin as evening settled in. They talked long into the night, planning how to approach potential witnesses, what evidence they might gather. The baby slept peacefully in his cradle, unaware of the battles being planned on his behalf. Finally, Isabel's head began to nod with exhaustion. The mountain man insisted she get some rest while he kept watch. As she settled onto her pallet near the fire, she looked up at him thoughtfully. "Why do you do all this?" she asked softly. "Risk so much for us?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Because it's right," he said finally, "and because everyone deserves someone to stand beside them when trouble comes." Isabel nodded, understanding what he left unsaid, how his loss had taught him the value of protecting others. "Thank you," she whispered, then closed her eyes. The mountain man settled back in his chair, rifle across his knees. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, his duty was clear. Outside, an owl called softly in the darkness, and somewhere in town, corrupt men plotted against them. But here, in the cabin's warm circle of lamplight, hope and determination grew stronger with each passing hour. They had a plan, but they didn't know their enemies had one too. Dawn light crept over the mountain peaks as the mountain man saddled his horse. The morning air held a bite, warning of winter's approach. He adjusted his coat collar, glancing back at the cabin where Isabel stood in the doorway with the baby. Mrs. Keene had arrived early to stay with them while he rode to town. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised, swinging into the saddle. "Just keep practicing what you'll say at the hearing." Isabel nodded, clutching the baby closer. "Be careful," she said softly. The ride into town took longer than usual. The mountain man chose his path carefully, avoiding the main road where the deputy might spot him. His mind churned with all he'd witnessed at the saloon yesterday, the stolen bonds, the corrupt deputy, the stepfather's scheming. The truth had to come out, but he knew the odds were stacked against them. The church stood quiet on the edge of town, its white clapboard walls gleaming in the morning sun. Reverend Thomas was outside tending to his small garden when the mountain man rode up. "Brother," the preacher greeted him, brushing dirt from his hands. "You look troubled." "Need to talk," the mountain man said, dismounting. "It's about Isabel." Inside the church office, the mountain man related everything he'd seen and heard at the saloon. The preacher listened intently, his weathered face growing grave. "This is serious," Reverend Thomas said when the mountain man finished. "Corruption in law enforcement strikes at the heart of justice itself." He stood and paced the small room. "But you understand the challenge we face. The deputy has authority here, and many in town—" He hesitated. "Many won't believe an Apache girl over a white lawman," the mountain man finished bluntly. "Sad, but true." The preacher sighed. "Some hearts are harder than others when it comes to seeing past differences." "But you'll help?" the mountain man pressed. "Your word carries weight." Reverend Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll help. I've watched Isabel these past days, seen her gentle spirit, her devotion to her child. There's truth in her that can't be denied." He smiled faintly. "And I've seen how you've changed since taking her in. God's hand moves in mysterious ways." "Much obliged," the mountain man said gruffly, uncomfortable with the observation. Back at the cabin, Isabel sat at the rough-hewn table, speaking her testimony aloud while Mrs. Keene listened. The baby slept peacefully in his new cradle, a simple but sturdy piece the mountain man had crafted from pine boards, working late into the night while Isabel and the child slept. "I saw him take papers from the strong box," Isabel practiced, her voice growing stronger with each telling. "He made me carry heavy sacks to distract the guards. But I saw what he did." Mrs. Keene nodded encouragingly. "Good. Speak just like that at the hearing. Clear and direct. Truth has its own power. The baby stirred, making small sounds of hunger. Isabel lifted him from the cradle, cradling him close as she nursed. Mrs. Keene busied herself preparing herbs for a healing tea. "You're a good with him," she observed. "A natural mother." Isabel smiled down at her son. "He gives me strength," she said softly. "When I look at him, I know I must be brave." The mountain man returned as evening approached, bringing news of the preacher's support. The cabin felt warm and welcoming after the long ride. Something about seeing Isabel and the baby with Mrs. Keene fussing over a pot of venison stew made his heart lift strangely. They sat down to supper together, the lamp casting a gentle glow over the table. Mrs. Keene had outdone herself with the stew, adding wild onions and herbs to the rich broth. The baby slept contentedly in his cradle nearby. "Thank you," Isabel said suddenly, looking at the mountain man, "for saving my life that day at the auction. I never properly said it before." He shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "Was God's will," he muttered. "Couldn't leave you there." "Still," she persisted, "you gave up your silver for a stranger, took us in, built this cradle." She touched the smooth pine boards. "No one's shown such kindness to me before." The mountain man found himself unable to meet her eyes, moved by the simple truth in her words. Looking around the cabin, at Isabel's gentle face, the sleeping baby, the shared meal, he realized something had changed. Where once there had been only emptiness and grief, now there was warmth, purpose, like a family gathered at table. Mrs. Keene watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing, simply passing the cornbread. Later, after Mrs. Keene had gone home and Isabel had settled on her pallet near the fire, the mountain man sat in his chair by the door, rifle across his knees as usual. The night was quiet, except for the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. Peace seemed to fill the cabin like a tangible thing. He found himself watching Isabel's face in sleep, softened by firelight. The baby made small sounds in his cradle, and she automatically reached out to soothe him, even in slumber. The sight stirred something deep in his chest. Memories of his own wife and daughter, but without the usual sharp pain. Instead, he felt grateful. Whole again, somehow. The peace shattered just before dawn. Thundering hooves broke the pre-dawn stillness, jerking the mountain man from his light doze. Isabel sat up, clutching the baby, who had begun to cry. Before either could move, the cabin door burst open with a crash. The deputy stood framed in the doorway, several armed men behind him. "Nobody move!" he barked, pistol drawn. The mountain man reached for his rifle, but two men were already on him, wrestling the weapon away and forcing his arms behind his back. Cold iron closed around his wrists. "No!" Isabel cried as more men surrounded her. They wrenched the screaming baby from her arms, ignoring her desperate struggles. "Please! My son!" "Isabel Martinez," the deputy announced with obvious satisfaction. "You're under arrest for theft of railroad property." He nodded to his men, who quickly shackled her wrists. "The child will be turned over to proper authorities." "You can't do this!" the mountain man growled, straining against his bonds. "She's innocent! We have proof!" The deputy smiled coldly. "Proof? A half-breed's word against mine?" "I think not." He turned to his men. "Take them both. We'll sort this out in town." They were dragged roughly outside, where more men waited with horses. The baby's cries pierced the dawn air as he was handed to a deputy's wife who stood ready with a wagon. Isabel fought like a wild thing, calling out in Spanish and Apache, but the men only laughed and forced her onto a horse. The mountain man watched helplessly as they bound her feet beneath the horse's belly. His own mount waited, but he couldn't take his eyes off Isabel's face. The despair there, the shattering of hope, cut him to the bone. "Move out!" the deputy ordered. As they rode away from the cabin, the mountain man's mind raced. Everything they'd built, the fragile peace they'd found, lay in ruins behind them. But beneath his anger and fear, determination burned. Somehow he would find a way to protect Isabel and her child. Somehow the truth would prevail. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for such a dark morning. The baby's cries faded as the wagon took a different trail toward town. Isabel's shoulders shook with silent sobs ahead of him. The deputy rode at the front of the group, straight-backed and smugly confident in his power. The mountain man's hands might be bound, but his spirit remained free. He had not saved Isabel from the auction block only to lose her now to corruption and lies. God's will had brought them together. He had to believe that same divine purpose would see them through this trial. They rode on toward town, toward whatever fate awaited them, as the new day blazed across the sky with indifferent glory. Their plan was in ashes, their hope was gone, and now they were prisoners. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold as the prisoners were marched into town. The deputy's men yanked Isabel and the mountain man roughly from their horses, drawing a small crowd of onlookers. Dust swirled around their boots as they stumbled forward, hands still bound behind their backs. The baby's frightened wails cut through the morning air. Mrs. Peterson, the deputy's neighbor, stood waiting with outstretched arms. She grabbed the infant from the wagon with little gentleness, holding him at arm's length as if he might soil her dress. "No, please!" Isabel cried out, tears streaming down her face. She lurched toward her son, but the deputies held her fast. "He needs me! He's still nursing! You cannot separate us!" The mountain man strained against his bonds, trying to position himself between Isabel and her captors. "The child needs his mother," he growled. "Show some Christian mercy." Mrs. Peterson sniffed, adjusting her grip on the squalling infant. "He'll do fine on goat's milk. Better he learn proper ways now before it's too late." She turned away, the baby's cries growing fainter as she disappeared down the dusty street. Isabel's legs gave way, and she would have fallen if not for the deputy's cruel grip on her arms. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as they dragged her toward the jail, a small wooden building with barred windows. The mountain man fought to stay close even as rough hands shoved him forward. "Be strong," he called to her. "God hasn't abandoned us. Keep faith." Inside the jail, the smell of old straw and unwashed bodies filled the air. Two small cells faced each other across a narrow corridor. The deputy unlocked the first cell and thrust Isabel inside. She stumbled to her knees on the dirty straw, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. They threw the mountain man into the opposite cell, the iron door clanging shut with terrible finality. The deputy hung the keys on a hook by his desk, smirking as he settled into his chair. "Comfortable?" he asked mockingly. "Better get used to it. After the hearing tomorrow, you'll both be headed for territorial prison, if the girl's lucky enough to avoid hanging." The mountain man gripped the bars, glaring at their jailer. "You know she's innocent. Your conscience will haunt you for this injustice." The deputy only laughed, propping his boots on the desk. "Save your preaching. No one's going to believe a half-breed thief and her mountain man protector over respectable citizens." Hours crawled by like wounded things. Shafts of sunlight moved slowly across the floor as morning turned to afternoon. Isabel remained huddled in her cell, rocking back and forth as she whispered prayers in Spanish and Apache. Her breasts ached with milk, meant for her baby, but she refused to show weakness before their captors. The mountain man kept his own vigil, watching over her through the bars. His deep voice carried across the space between them as he recalled passages of Scripture, offering what comfort he could. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he intoned, "for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Isabel's rocking slowed as she listened, drawing strength from the familiar words. Her own prayers merged with his recitations, weaving together in a quiet testament to enduring faith. The deputy changed shifts with another man as evening approached. Shadows lengthened across the jail floor, and the heat of the day began to fade. Isabel's voice had grown hoarse from weeping, though her prayers never ceased entirely. The mountain man was about to start another psalm when a shadow, darker than the others, slipped through the door. The new deputy dozed in his chair, oblivious to the silent figure that materialized beside the cells. "Henry," the mountain man breathed, recognizing the Ute scout's distinctive profile. Henry moved like smoke, his moccasins making no sound on the wooden floor. He pressed close to the bars, speaking in a whisper that barely stirred the air. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "I owe you my life from that winter hunt, and I pay my debts." The mountain man remembered that desperate time 2 years ago, finding the young scout half frozen in the mountains, sharing his meager supplies and shelter until Henry could travel again. But there was no time for memories now. "What news?" he asked quietly. Henry's dark eyes glittered in the dim light. "I was in the saloon earlier. The stepfather was there, drunk and boasting. He had a leather pouch full of railroad bonds, showed them to everyone, claiming he won them in a card game." Isabel pressed against her own bars, hope flickering across her tear-stained face. "You saw the bonds yourself?" "Yes," Henry confirmed. "And I heard him brag about how clever he was, planting blame on his stepdaughter while he made the real theft." The mountain man's hands tightened on the iron bars. "Did anyone else hear this confession?" "Many heard, but few will speak against a white man to save an Apache girl." Henry's voice held old bitterness. "But I know where he keeps the bonds. If I can get them, bring them to the hearing." "It's too dangerous," the mountain man protested. "The deputy and the stepfather are working together. If they catch you—" Henry straightened, pride evident in his bearing. "I am Ute. I can move unseen when I choose. And this is a matter of justice. The spirits will guide my path." Isabel reached through her bars, catching Henry's sleeve. "My baby," she pleaded. "Can you check on him? Make sure he is well." The scout's face softened. "I will watch over your son. Mrs. Peterson's house is near the creek. I have seen him through the window. He cries much, but seems healthy." Fresh tears spilled down Isabel's cheeks, but these held gratitude rather than despair. "Thank you," she whispered. "God sent you to help us." "Time grows short," Henry warned, glancing at the sleeping deputy. "The hearing is tomorrow at noon. I will try to find the bonds tonight, but if I cannot—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implications clear. The mountain man nodded gravely. "We understand. You risk much already, my friend. Whatever happens, we are grateful." Henry touched his chest in a gesture of respect, then melted back into the shadows as silently as he had come. Within moments, there was no sign he had ever been there at all. The deputy snorted and shifted in his chair, but didn't wake. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and somewhere a child laughed. Sounds of normal life continuing despite the drama unfolding in the jail's close confines. Isabel sank down onto her straw pallet, looking somehow both more fragile and stronger than before. "Do you think he can do it?" she asked softly. "Find the proof we need?" The mountain man considered his words carefully. "Henry is one of the most skilled trackers I've ever known. If anyone can find those bonds, he will." He paused, then added, "But more importantly, he is a man of honor. Whatever happens, he will do his best to see justice done." She nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. "I keep thinking of my baby," she confessed, "wondering if he's hungry, if he's afraid. The sound of his crying when they took him." Her voice broke. "Focus on prayer," the mountain man advised gently. "Keep faith. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, but tonight we have hope we didn't have before." Isabel closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent supplication. The mountain man watched over her, his own prayers rising to join hers in the gathering darkness. Outside their barred windows, the sun sank behind the mountains. painting the sky in colors too beautiful for such a troubled evening. Through the long night hours, they kept their vigil, the mountain man standing guard, while Isabel dozed fitfully on her pallet. From time to time, they would hear footsteps passing on the street outside, or the distant sound of horses. Each noise made them wonder if it was Henry working to save them, or someone else moving pieces against them in this deadly game. The deputy changed shifts twice more, but neither the stepfather nor any other visitors came to the jail. The mountain man thought of his cabin standing empty under the stars, of the cradle he had built with such care. He thought of Isabel's son crying in a stranger's house, and his jaw clenched with helpless anger. But mostly he thought of Henry, moving like a shadow through the night, carrying their hopes with him. The scout's appearance had been unexpected, a reminder that even in the darkest times, help could come from unexpected quarters. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. But for now they clung to that fragile thread of hope, waiting for dawn and whatever justice the new day might bring. This was their only chance. The small courthouse creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Morning sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Isabel sat straight-backed on the rough bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. The mountain man stood nearby, his presence steady as stone. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The sound echoed through the packed room, silencing the murmuring crowd. The deputy strutted forward, chest puffed with self-importance. His polished badge caught the light as he faced the judge. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice carrying to the back rows. "We've caught a thief who's been preying on honest folk. This Apache girl," he jabbed a finger toward Isabel, "stole valuable railroad bonds from a secured strongbox." Whispers rustled through the crowd. Some faces twisted with scorn, while others merely watched with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Keene, sitting in the front row, reached over to squeeze Isabel's shoulder. "The defendant may speak," Judge Harrison declared, peering down at Isabel over his spectacles. Isabel rose slowly, her legs unsteady. The mountain man's encouraging nod gave her strength as she faced the sea of hostile faces. "I did not steal anything," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I saw my stepfather late one night when he thought I was sleeping. He opened the railroad strongbox with a key he wasn't supposed to have. I watched him take papers, the bonds, and hide them in his coat." "Lies," the deputy interrupted, his face reddening. "Your Honor, she's trying to slander an honest man to save herself." "Let her finish," the judge commanded sharply. Isabel continued, gaining courage with each word. "My stepfather made me carry heavy sacks for the railroad men, so I knew where they kept important things. He thought he could blame me because—" She swallowed hard. "Because who would believe an Apache girl over him?" Muttering filled the courthouse. The deputy's face twisted into a sneer. "Pure fabrication, Your Honor. We have no evidence of these wild claims. I move that we—" The courthouse door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Henry the Ute scout strode in, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor despite his urgent pace. In his outstretched hand, he held a small piece of paper. "I have proof," he declared, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The judge adjusted his spectacles. "Approach the bench, sir." Henry walked forward, ignoring the deputy's murderous glare. "This is a pawn ticket from Dawson's trading post, signed by her stepfather 2 days ago. He traded railroad bonds for cash and whiskey." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the judge examined the ticket. The deputy's face had gone from red to purple. "This appears to be legitimate," the judge announced. "Bailiff, fetch the stepfather for questioning immediately." "No need for that," the deputy snarled, and in one fluid motion he drew his revolver. "Nobody's going anywhere!" Women screamed, men ducked. The judge rose halfway from his seat before the deputy's gun swung his way. "You're all fools," the deputy spat. "That Apache witch has bewitched you all. I won't let—" The mountain man moved like lightning. He launched himself at the deputy, catching him around the waist. They crashed to the floor, the revolver skittering away under a bench. The two men grappled, rolling across rough planks as the crowd scattered. The deputy fought dirty, trying to gouge eyes and bite. But the mountain man's strength and righteous purpose prevailed. He pinned the corrupt lawman face down, twisting his arms behind his back. "Bailiff!" the judge thundered. "Shackles!" The bailiff hurried forward with iron cuffs, and soon the deputy found himself in the very restraints he had so often used on others. The mountain man stood, breathing hard, as two men dragged the former lawman to his feet. "Order! Order in this court!" The judge's gavel crashed down repeatedly until the chaos subsided. "Based on this evidence and the deputy's violent reaction, I hereby dismiss all charges against Isabel Martinez. Furthermore, I order the immediate arrest of both her stepfather and this former deputy for theft, corruption, and attempted assault with a deadly weapon." Isabel sagged in relief, tears streaming down her face. The mountain man returned to her side, supporting her with a gentle hand on her elbow. Henry stood nearby, a quiet smile of satisfaction on his face. The courthouse erupted in excited chatter as the truth of Isabel's innocence and the corruption of their law officer sank in. Mrs. Keene pushed through the crowd, announcing that she would fetch Isabel's baby right away. The judge's voice cut through the commotion one final time. "Let it be known that justice in this town depends not on a person's heritage or station, but on truth and evidence. This hearing is adjourned." Isabel sank to her knees as Mrs. Keene hurried in with her baby boy. She gathered him close, tears flowing freely as his tiny fingers curled around her thumb. The weight of fear lifted from her shoulders like winter frost melting in spring sunshine. The preacher's wife stepped forward, wrapping a protective arm around Isabel's shoulders. Her voice rang with righteous anger as she faced the gathered townsfolk. "Shame on all of you who judge this child without mercy. God sees the truth in every heart." Judge Harrison descended from his bench, removing his spectacles. "Miss Isabel, on behalf of this court and this town, I offer our deepest apologies. You are cleared of all charges and free to go." The mountain man sat quietly on a nearby bench, dabbing at a cut on his lip from the fight. Isabel moved to kneel beside him, her dark eyes shining with grateful tears. That evening, lamplight warmed the windows of the little church as people filed in uneasily. Reverend Thomas stood before them, leading prayers of repentance and healing. Isabel's voice rose clear and sweet in the hushed sanctuary, singing an Apache lullaby to her sleeping child. The townsfolk watched in chastened silence, finally seeing the grace and dignity they had refused to acknowledge before. The mountain man bowed his head in prayer, thanking the Lord for justice served, though he knew the wounds of prejudice would take time to heal. Morning sunlight painted the town in soft gold as the mountain man loaded the last supplies into his wagon. He spread a thick blanket across the wooden seat, making it comfortable for Isabel and the baby's journey home. Home. The word felt right in his heart. Reverend Thomas gathered the townsfolk around the wagon, his Bible open in his weathered hands. "Let us pray for these three souls," he declared, his voice carrying across the morning quiet. "They are our kin now, under God's eyes. Remember well the lesson of mercy we've learned." The wagon creaked softly as they left town behind. Isabel leaned against the mountain man's shoulder, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. Exhaustion and relief mingled in her gentle sigh. They traveled in comfortable silence, watching shadows lengthen across the trail. By dusk, the cabin's familiar shape welcomed them home. Through the window, a lamp glowed warm and inviting. Inside, they shared a simple supper of bread and stew. Later, with the baby asleep in his cradle, Isabel turned to the mountain man by the firelight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when no one would." He gazed into the flames, his voice rough with emotion. "You and the little one. You've healed something broken in me." They sat together in the fire's warmth, their silence full of unspoken promise. The days flowed like the creek behind the cabin, steady and peaceful. Morning light found Isabel at the hearth, flour dusting her hands as she learned the secrets of sourdough from the mountain man's mother's recipe. Her first loaf came out a bit dark on the bottom, but the smile it brought to his face made her heart lift. In the workshop corner, wood shavings curled around the mountain man's boots as he shaped pine boards into a rocking chair, perfect for late-night hours with the baby. The familiar rhythm of saw and plane filled their days with purpose. Hesitant footsteps brought neighbors to their door, carrying gifts wrapped in calico, fresh flour, warm quilts, even a jar of honey. Shame and newfound respect mingled in their eyes as they watched Isabel graciously accept each offering. One evening, as sunset painted the cabin walls gold, Reverend Thomas and Mrs. Keene paid a visit. Over cups of steaming coffee, the preacher cleared his throat. "We thought perhaps a simple marriage blessing might be fitting, if you both wish it." Isabel's cheeks flushed warm as roses. The mountain man set down his cup carefully, his voice steady. "I'd be honored if Isabel agrees." They chose Sunday, but their true vows came sooner. That night, beneath countless stars, they stood by the new cradle. Their whispered promises rose like prayer into the vast night sky, witnessed by God alone. Sunday's crisp morning air filled the little clapboard church to bursting. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows as townsfolk squeezed into wooden pews, whispering and watching. Isabel stood before the altar, wrapped in Mrs. Keene's treasured white shawl, her baby nestled contentedly against her shoulder. The mountain man towered beside her, his weathered face softened with joy. Reverend Thomas raised his hands over them both. "Let this union teach us all about God's mercy and the power of compassion," he declared. "What was broken has been made whole." Scattered applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling with genuine warmth. Outside, beneath swaying pine boughs, neighbors spread quilts laden with fresh bread, preserves, and steaming coffee. A fiddle sang sweet and low while children danced. As evening painted the sky purple, the newlyweds rode home in their wagon, stars winking overhead like scattered diamonds. Inside their cabin, lamplight cast golden shadows. The baby slept peacefully in his new cradle, while Isabel leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for this miracle of family, born again through your grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways." If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might just change your day.